Welcome everyone to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here. We have a really intense one today.
We really do.
Yeah.
If you've been watching the corporate landscape shift over the last decade, or if you're listening today because you might identify with the men's rights movement,
Right.
or maybe you consider yourself a red-pilled man trying to understand the history of our institutions and how they've just, drastically shifted in recent decades, then you're definitely in the right place.
Absolutely. Because we know you're looking for clarity.
Exactly. You're looking for that historical context and for a meticulous breakdown of the forces shaping the modern world, especially before what some argue was their capture by new ideological frameworks.
Before the shift really took hold.
Right. But before we even get started, I want to ask you to please take a quick second to like and subscribe to the show. It really, really helps us keep bringing you these incredibly detailed explorations of the source materials you care about.
It makes a huge difference.
It does. So today, we have an extensive, utterly fascinating review of a highly controversial new ebook by Conrad Reicher. And the title alone tells you exactly what kind of terrain we are crossing today.
It does not hold back.
No, it doesn't. It is called HR Struggle Sessions, Karen's Cultural Revolution Enforcing Feminization and Communism in Corporations.
Quite the title.
Yeah. For anyone who wants to follow along, verify the data, or dig into the material themselves, we highly encourage you to check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book.
And you can follow the author at Conrad and Reicher on Substack.
Yes, definitely do that. Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to thoroughly dissect Reicher's explosive thesis.
And it is explosive.
Very much so. He's arguing, with a massive compilation of data, anecdotes, and internal corporate leaks, that modern corporate, legal, educational, and medical institutions have been captured by what he describes as feminist and Marxist ideologies.
Right, and he's claiming that this isn't just a sort of, natural cultural drift.
No, not at all. He says it's a deliberate, systemic overhaul designed to completely dismantle traditional meritocracy and male identity.
Now, before we get deep into the weeds here, it is crucial to state up front that as your guides today, we are not taking sides,
Right.
nor are we endorsing the viewpoints presented in this book. Our job is to impartially report on the author's claims, analyze the structure of his arguments, and present his evidence to you exactly as it appears in the source material.
We're just looking at the text.
Exactly. Reicher's book is a polemic, and it deals with intensely politically charged content from start to finish. Whether you approach this text as a survival manual,
Which is precisely how he frames it for his readers, by the way.
yes, or if you approach it as a sociological artifact of our current cultural moment, our goal is to give you a comprehensive, objective synthesis of his arguments.
Just laying it all out.
We are here to map the territory he has laid out so that you, the listener, can understand the architecture of his claims.
That is the perfect way to frame this. We're looking at the blueprint he provides. And to do that justice, we are going to walk through this material systematically.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. We'll start with the corporate overhaul and what he refers to as the rise of HR struggle sessions. From there, we'll look into his claims regarding the weaponization of language, tears, and workplace gossip.
The whole corporate ecosystem.
Yeah. Then we'll pivot to the legal system to examine the feminist legal revolution and the maternal state. After that, we'll move into the institutional capture of education and medicine, touch on cultural shifts regarding hypergamy and beauty standards, and finally...
And we will break down his proposed path to restoration.
Exactly. Let's start right at the beginning of his book. Reicher introduces a claim that strikes at the very heart of the Western workplace. He argues that corporate America has entirely abandoned objective merit.
It's a bold starting point.
He's saying, we're no longer rewarding the people who solve the hardest problems or generate the most revenue. Instead, we're rewarding the people who navigate emotional landscapes the best, demanding what he calls emotional compliance.
And what's fascinating here is how Reicher immediately grounds this philosophical claim in data rather than just relying on observation or anecdotes.
He brings the numbers early on.
He really does.
Oh.
Early in the book, he cites a 2021 Harvard Business Review study that presents some incredibly stark findings regarding promotion trajectories.
I remember this part. It was wild.
According to the data he references, highly skilled but unemotional men are 42% less likely to advance in their careers than women who are objectively less competent in their core tasks but openly expressive.
Wait, a 42% drop in advancement.
That's what the data he pulled indicates.
Just to be clear, the study he's citing is comparing a man with superior technical skills to a woman with inferior technical skills, but the woman advances almost half the time more simply because she is more emotionally expressive.
That is precisely how Riker interprets and presents the data. Let's really look at the mechanics of that claim.
Yeah, break that down.
Riker is stating that a man could be the top structural engineer in a firm, right? Delivering flawless schematics, hitting every single deadline, solving complex systemic issues under immense pressure without breaking a sweat.
The ideal employee, historically.
Historically, yes. But Riker says he will still be passed over for a promotion if he doesn't share personal feelings in meetings or use the specific vocabulary of emotional growth.
And he builds on this to argue that a colleague with inferior technical skills will rise rapidly through the ranks simply by utilizing emotional performativity.
Exactly. This could mean crying during stressful performance reviews to elicit sympathy, constantly referring to the corporate team as a quote-unquote family, and displaying an outward continuous warmth.
He uses this to illustrate a total inversion of corporate values. The core competency of the job is now secondary to the emotional management of the office environment.
And he has a very specific phrase for this shift.
Feminization by bureaucratic fiat.
Yes. It's a striking phrase.
It really is. He's essentially arguing that traditional male traits, things like assertiveness, direct, unvarnished communication, goal-oriented rivalry, stoicism, that these are now actively pathologized in the corporate world.
They're no longer just different styles of working.
No, they aren't just seen as different. They are broadly categorized under the nebulous umbrella of toxic masculinity.
Right.
And on the flip side, traditionally female traits, like emotional expression, collaboration over unilateral decision-making, consensus building, those are elevated to become the absolute default standard of what it means to be a professional.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it fundamentally changes the rules of engagement for you if you're a man in a modern office.
Totally changes the game. And he provides several vivid anecdotes to drive this home. There's one particularly striking story he shares about a manager at Meta.
No, the vocal pitch story.
Yes. According to the text, this manager was officially pulled aside by HR and told to, quote, lower his vocal pitch and to use more affirming gestures when speaking to his team.
The framing Riker uses there is highly illustrative.
Yeah, I remember reading that part. He says the man was basically instructed to mimic a kindergarten teacher reading a bedtime story.
Yes. And when the manager in question answered questions directly during a review, instead of using padding phrases like, I hear you or I validate your experience, HR officially documented that he was emotionally underdeveloped.
Emotionally underdeveloped because he answered a work question directly.
Exactly. Riker views these instances not as isolated interactions with bad managers, but as institutional mandates handed down from the top.
He details another case at Microsoft, right?
Yeah, where a senior software architect was denied a critical promotion.
And the reason was insane.
It wasn't because of coding bugs, and it wasn't because of missed metrics. His 360-degree performance review stated that he doesn't smile enough.
That is wild.
Because his resting facial expressions didn't project sufficient cheerfulness, he was deemed unfit for leadership.
To be denied a promotion in a highly technical field like software architecture simply because of a lack of smiling.
It sounds absurd, but that's what he's reporting.
He also brings up an IBM manager from 2015 who was forced into an emotional accountability workshop because a single subordinate complained he spoke too loudly during a team meeting.
Just for speaking loudly.
Right, and just to clarify, according to the book, did he yell at anyone? Was it abusive?
No, Riker specifies that nobody else complained and no actual behavioral rule or professional code of conduct was broken.
It was purely subjective.
It was simply the subjective feeling of one employee who felt the volume of his voice was uncomfortable.
Wow.
And Riker analyzes this entire dynamic through a very specific historical lens. This is where the title of the book comes into play.
The struggle sessions part.
Yes.
Yeah.
He compares modern human resources departments to Maoist struggle sessions.
Now that's a heavy comparison.
It is. During the Chinese Cultural Revolution, struggle sessions were public spectacles where individuals were verbally and physically abused by crowds until they confessed to various ideological crimes and apologized for their thoughts.
So he's drawing a direct parallel between that and a modern HR meeting.
He points to U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics data from 2023 showing that HR departments are currently 73% female.
73%.
Yes, and because of this overwhelming demographic monopoly, Riker alleges that HR operates on a deeply maternalist logic.
Let's unpack what he means by maternalist logic, because the book relies really heavily on this concept. How does a maternal instinct which most people associate with nurturing children, translate into a Maoist struggle session in a corporate boardroom.
It's a compelling theoretical leap. Raker claims this maternal instinct, when diverted from actual motherhood and channeled into corporate bureaucracy, artificially splits the workplace into two distinct categories.
Okay, what are the categories?
On one side, you have the infants. In his framework, this mostly includes women and female allies.
Infants.
Right. The system treats them as inherently innocent, fragile, and in constant need of protection from any form of emotional discomfort or harsh reality.
And the others?
On the other side, you have the predators, which the system defines as men. They are treated as inherently dangerous, guilty by default, and in constant need of training, correction, and behavioral control.
So he says HR doesn't protect employees anymore. It protects the organization from men.
That is the crux of his argument in this section. HR is no longer a neutral arbiter of disputes. It is an ideological guard dog.
And this leads directly into his blistering critique of the DEI industry. Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
He doesn't just see it as a misguided set of corporate policies.
No, he calls it the DEI industrial complex. He throws some heavy numbers at the reader here, too. He breaks down the financials, noting that the DEI industry is a $40 billion a year machine.
$40 billion.
It is a massive, highly funded apparatus with an army of consultants and specialized software. But what exactly is this machine producing, according to him?
Well, Riker argues that the core philosophy driving this machine, specifically the concept of equity, is actually Marxist-Leninist outcome redistribution.
But it has been repackaged.
Exactly. Instead of violent revolution, it uses corporate buzzwords, PowerPoint presentations, and pastel graphics.
Pastel graphics, yeah.
He argues that equity, in the modern corporate lexicon, no longer means equal opportunity. It means guaranteed equal outcomes.
And to achieve guaranteed equal outcomes across different demographics, it inevitably requires enforcing quotas.
Which Raker's thesis says you cannot enforce without artificially lowering standards.
So unqualified individuals can rise, while competent men are systematically suppressed. To illustrate how blatant this suppression has become, he quotes a leaks recording from a female HR director at Salesforce.
That was a pivotal quote in the book.
It really was. I want to make sure I get the quote right. On the tape, she allegedly states, "We don't care about fairness. We care about hitting our DEI quotas. Men are surplus."
That is the exact quote he highlights. Men are surplus.
That has to be an incredibly chilling quote for any listener out there grinding out 70-hour work weeks, writing code or managing logistics, just trying to provide for his family.
And that is precisely why Riker includes it. He wants you, the listener, to understand his perspective. These aren't just clunky corporate policies implemented by well-meaning but incompetent executives.
He sees them as a deliberate ideological purge.
A coordinated effort to dismantle male leadership pipelines and replace them with a new gynocratic order.
He mentions that at companies like Meta, men are actually demoted or put on administrative leave for refusing to sign gender equity pledges.
Yes.
Pledges that literally require them to formally affirm their own, quote, male fragility and acknowledge their inherent bias.
It sounds like an environment where logic is treated as suspect.
Completely. If you point to data that contradicts the quota, the data is dismissed because it offends someone. The only acceptable male identity in this framework is one of total apologizing submission.
This raises an important question, though. How is this level of control maintained on a day-to-day basis?
Right, because no one is holding a gun to their heads.
Exactly. It's one thing to have a policy, but how do you enforce this maternalist bureaucracy without using physical force? Riker asserts that it relies on the weaponization of emotion.
Specifically through tears, carefully engineered language, and covert social networks. Here's where it gets really interesting.
It does.
Because Riker devotes an entire chapter to what he calls the weaponization of tears. He makes the claim that crying in the modern workplace is no longer viewed as a breakdown of professional composure.
Which is a huge shift.
Huge. A generation ago, if you cried at work, you were deeply embarrassed. But Riker argues that today, crying has become a highly effective, deliberate career strategy.
And once again, he brings data to back up this assertion.
He loves the data.
He cites a 2021 MIT Sloan study that analyzed 12,000 human resources cases over a 5-year period.
Okay.
The findings are quite remarkable. The study showed that women who cry during performance reviews or disciplinary hearings are 70% less likely to face any formal discipline compared to those who do not.
70% less likely. So if a woman is failing at her job and is called into a review, crying gives her a 70% chance of walking away without a penalty.
That is what the data he references suggests. Riker points out a glaring double standard here.
Oh, the double standard is huge.
He argues that women who exhibit extreme emotional outbursts, those who throw tantrums, cry, raise their voices, or even throw items in the office, are frequently protected by HR.
Their behavior is reframed and praised as emotional authenticity or passionate advocacy. They are seen as caring deeply about their work.
Meanwhile, if a man merely raises his voice to be heard over a chaotic meeting, or sometimes even if he just maintains strong eye contact without smiling, he is immediately pathologized.
He is labeled as intimidating, aggressive, or exhibiting toxic masculinity, and he is swiftly fired.
Riker illustrates this with a highly detailed anecdote from a Boston consulting firm.
The budget meeting story.
Yes. According to the book, during a high-stakes budget allocation meeting, a female executive stormed out, screaming at her colleagues and claiming she was being gaslit regarding the project funds.
Screaming and storming out.
Following the incident, she was not reprimanded. Instead, she was subsequently promoted to lead a new DEI initiative, with HR citing her bravery and expressing her lived experience.
Unbelievable. And what happened to the men in the room?
In stark contrast, the male colleague who had calmly questioned her initial budget numbers using spreadsheets, logic, and historical data was placed on a PIP.
Let's define that for anyone who hasn't had the misfortune of dealing with HR bureaucracy.
Good idea.
A PIP is a performance improvement plan. It's essentially the corporate kiss of death. It's a formal document outlining how you are feeling and the impossible metrics you must hit to keep your job, usually used as a legal paper trail to fire you a few months later.
Correct. So the man who used data was put on a path to termination, while the woman who screamed was promoted.
Riker's analysis is that the system is perfectly calibrated to reward female emotionalism and punish male rationality.
But the enforcement goes far beyond just crying in meetings. Riker introduces a concept he calls the GSR network.
The GSR network. What exactly does that acronym stand for?
It stands for gossip, shame, rally.
Gossip, shame, rally.
He describes this as a covert relational aggression network that operates parallel to and often dictates the actions of the official HR department. It's essentially a shadow HR department run by female employees.
A shadow HR department. How does that work in practice? Are we talking about organized Slack channels plotting against people?
Essentially, yes. He cites a UCLA longitudinal study running from 2020 to 2023, which tracked communication patterns in large corporate environments.
And what did they find?
This study found that women initiate 87% of all workplace gossip chains.
87%.
And here's the vital statistic for Riker's argument. 73% of the targets of these gossip chains were high-achieving men.
73%. So this isn't just idle water cooler chatter about what someone watched on TV last night.
Not at all. Riker frames this as industrial-scale social sabotage.
Wow.
The gossip phase isolates the target. The shame phase attacks his reputation, usually using vague buzzwords.
And then the rally phase.
Right. The rally phase recruits allies to file simultaneous identical complaints to HR, creating the illusion of a systemic problem.
He tells multiple stories of men who are completely competent, who have zero documented performance failures or missed targets, were quietly pushed out of major tech companies like Google simply because a coordinated whisper campaign labeled them intense, abrasive, or difficult to work with.
Those words are so subjective. How do you defend yourself against the accusation of being intense?
You really can't.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Riker uses evolutionary psychology to explain why this specific tactic is so prevalent.
He brings in David Buss.
Yes. He cites researchers like Buss to argue that historically, in ancestral environments, women evolved to use social exclusion, alliance building, and indirect communication for mate suppression and to control male competition.
Because direct physical confrontation was too dangerous for them.
Exactly. Covert relational aggression was the evolutionary strategy for survival and dominance.
So you're saying the book argues that modern office gossip is actually an evolved biological weapon.
That is Riker's exact thesis. This primal evolutionary instinct has now been fully institutionalized in the modern corporate world.
Operating under the guise of formalized peer feedback and 360-degree reviews.
Right. It allows female employees to eliminate high-performing male competitors without ever having to confront them directly on their technical skills or beat them on objective revenue metrics.
And to make sure men can't even defend themselves against this shadow network. Riker argues that the very language we use has been feminized and weaponized. He talks about the absolute end of free speech in the corporate world.
The criminalization of normal, everyday language.
Yes. He provides several alarming examples of this linguistic policing. He shares the story of a senior engineer at Lockheed Martin who was officially reprimanded and forced to attend a 2-day sensitivity training seminar.
Over one word.
One word. His offense. He used the word guys in an email to a mixed-gender team. For example, "Hey guys, the project files are updated."
A word that has been colloquially gender neutral across the United States for decades.
Decades. But now it's treated procedurally as a hate crime or a microaggression. He mentions another employee at Salesforce who was put on a PIP, again, a performance improvement plan, for using the phrase man hours when scheduling a massive server migration. Man hours is just standard industrial terminology for time estimation.
Riker points out that terms like microaggressions and psychological safety were originally introduced into the corporate lexicon with the stated intention of improving workplace dynamics and fostering collaboration.
But they've been co-opted.
Completely co-opted, they are now weaponized as terms of absolute control, used specifically to silence any male dissent.
How does he define the current use of psychological safety? Because on its face, it sounds like a good thing. You want people to feel safe at work.
Well, Riker argues that in practice, the phrase psychological safety now effectively means that female employees must be shielded from any facts, data, or logical arguments that cause them emotional discomfort or challenge their worldview.
As Riker parishly quotes in his text, truth is only offensive when it contradicts the dogma.
Yes. If a man uses logic and spreadsheets to point out a mathematical flaw in a DEI quota or a budget proposal, he isn't debated on the merits of his data. He is fired for making his colleagues feel unsafe.
It's an environment where men are constantly walking on eggshells. You can't speak directly, you can't use standard industry terms, and you can't rely on your technical skills to save you.
It's a complete paradigm shift.
It really is. But as Riker points out, if you think the corporate HR department is bad, wait until you see what happens when these exact same ideological frameworks are given the full, coercive life and death power of the state.
The legal system chapters.
Yes. So if this maternalist logic is completely dominating the boardroom, where does it go next? This brings us to the legal system, something I know is of massive interest to our audience.
Oh, absolutely.
Riker argues that the legal system, specifically the family courts, has been entirely hollowed out. He calls it the feminist legal revolution and the maternal state.
He claims that in these courtrooms, emotion doesn't just trump evidence, emotion is the evidence.
He describes modern family courts as feminist tribunals.
And according to Riker, the foundational legal principle of innocent until proven guilty has been inverted for men.
Fully inverted.
Men entering the family court system are presumed guilty of abuse, abandonment, or financial neglect without any need for hard evidence from the opposing party.
To support this massive claim, he cites a 2022 UCLA study focusing on custody outcomes. The study shows that 70% of custody battles are lost by men.
Meaning they're reduced to weekend visitors.
Right. Even when there is absolutely no proof of abuse, neglect, or instability on the father's part. A 70% loss rate just for being the male parent.
Yes. Riker argues that the default assumption of the court is no longer that two fit parents are standing before the judge. The default assumption is deadbeat dad versus saintly mother.
He ties this to what legal scholars call the maternal preference doctrine.
Right.
Riker claims this doctrine is not based on modern child psychology or developmental outcome data, which often shows children drastically need their fathers, but purely on feminist ideology that views motherhood as inherently sacred and fatherhood as entirely optional, or worse, merely transactional.
The statistics he shares on restraining orders in this section are genuinely terrifying.
Oh man, the restraining order data.
He pulls data from the Canadian Bar Association from 2023, revealing that an astonishing 92% of restraining orders are issued ex parte.
Let's define that legal jargon for the listener. Ex parte means the order is granted based solely on one party's claim, in this context, the woman's claim, without the man even being present in the courtroom.
He gets no notice.
No notice. There is no cross-examination. And he is entirely unable to offer a shred of defense or provide counter-evidence before the order is executed by armed police.
That is the reality of the ex parte process.
It's terrifying.
Riker argues that these orders were originally designed as emergency protections for individuals in immediate physical danger. However, he asserts they have been transformed into tactical weapons.
In modern divorce wars.
Exactly. They're used to instantly, legally evict men from their own homes seize their property, and completely sever them from their children before a single piece of evidence is evaluated by a judge.
And then the legal burden is placed entirely on the man to spend tens of thousands of dollars to prove his innocence months later.
By which point, the status quo of custody has already been established in the mother's favor.
It's an absolute weaponization of the police force. And this leads right into what Riker describes as the outright war on fatherhood and the reality of reproductive coercion.
He posits that the state has essentially stepped in to replace the husband as the ultimate provider, utilizing the legal system to aggressively extract resources from men.
He argues that this dynamic, where the state guarantees child support, alimony, and heavily skewed asset division, financially incentivizes what sociologists call the walkaway wife syndrome.
Riker points to the widely cited statistic that women initiate a staggering 78% of all divorces.
78%.
He argues they do this not because men have suddenly become universally abusive, but because the state has made it incredibly profitable and consequence-free for women to break the marital contract.
And the specific legal anecdotes he provides to highlight this financial extraction are some of the most shocking parts of the book. I want to read one of these directly.
The Missouri case.
Yes. He details the case of a man in Missouri who was legally ordered to pay child support for a pregnancy that ended in a 20-week abortion.
That case is deeply unsettling.
The child never even existed. The woman chose to terminate the pregnancy at 20 weeks, yet the local child support enforcement agency took the man to court, and the judge held him financially liable for the medical costs of the abortion and subsequent emotional damages related to the conception.
It's hard to even wrap your head around that.
And he points to another incredible piece of evidence. The Illinois Department of Health Care and Family Services has an official, written 2020 policy stating termination of pregnancy does not terminate financial liability.
Riker's analysis of this asymmetry is brutal. He argues that under current feminist legal frameworks, the moment sperm meets egg, the male reproductive system flips a switch, debtor status activated.
Debtor status activated.
He contends that society and the legal system grant women absolute unilateral control over the womb under the banner of my body, my choice.
Right.
A man cannot force a woman to have a child, nor can he prevent her from terminating a pregnancy. Yet, paradoxically, men are simultaneously assigned absolute unilateral financial liability for the conception, regardless of the woman's choices or the final outcome.
So the woman has all the authority and the man has all the responsibility.
Exactly. Riker argues this is the ultimate asymmetric warfare. The system is meticulously designed to punish male biology while offering women total legal immunity and social sanctity.
And he shows how this asymmetry bleeds into what he calls the trauma industrial complex. He argues that the Believe All Women doctrine, which gained massive cultural traction during the Me Too movement, has metastasized beyond college campus tribunals and criminal courts.
It has moved straight into corporate civil law.
He cites a lawsuit in Texas where a woman successfully sued her employer and won a $1.2 million payout for gaslighting.
The details of that case are crucial for understanding Riker's point. What was the actual behavior that constituted gaslighting resulting in $1 million penalty?
Well, love it.
She received negative performance feedback.
That's it.
Her manager pointed out errors in her weekly reports. That's it. There was no harassment, no inappropriate touching. But because she claimed the feedback caused her deep psychological trauma and made her question her own reality, the jury sided with her.
$1 million for negative feedback.
Riker uses this to state that female fragility has been fully medicalized, monetized, and legally weaponized.
In Riker's view, victimhood has become the highest social currency a woman can wield. By framing every normal professional interaction or marital disagreement through the lens of profound trauma, women are able to secure unearned promotions, win massive legal settlements, and entirely destroy male competitors.
And the system accommodates and accelerates this behavior because, as Riker notes, the feminist legal complex, which he defines as being comprised of female family court judges, predominantly female HR directors, and state-funded victim advocates, treats men as default aggressors.
It's a closed-loop system. The maternal state extracts male resources through taxes and settlements to fund female choices and bureaucracies, actively punishing any man who attempts to use logic or law to hold women accountable.
So what does this all mean for the next generation?
That's the real question. So what does this all mean? If you're a father listening to this, how are young boys being raised in a culture that operates on these rules?
Does this ideology just suddenly hit you when you turn 18 and enter the workforce or get married? Or is Riker saying this begins earlier?
He actually argues it starts on day one, right in preschool. This brings us to his analysis of the institutional capture of education and medicine.
He argues that the ideological possession starts long before a man can even comprehend the concepts of HR or family court.
He details the gynocratic takeover of the education system. For example, he notes that in the UK, 76% of all primary school teachers are female. He calls these early childhood classrooms echo chambers of estrogen.
Echo chambers of estrogen. So he's arguing that boys are not taught how to be men, but are trained from age 4 to apologize for their natural energy.
Precisely. Riker is highly critical of how natural boyish behavior, physicality, competition, risk-taking is increasingly pathologized by female educators.
He points to studies showing boys are vastly more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD and heavily medicated.
Riker argues this is not a sudden medical epidemic of defective boys, but rather a systemic intolerance for male energy in female-dominated, highly controlled indoor spaces.
He illustrates this with a story from Ontario that is just infuriating.
Oh, the 7-year-old?
A 7-year-old boy was suspended from school. His crime. During recess, while playing make-believe, he pointed his finger like a gun and said, pew pew.
Pew pew.
He was suspended under a zero-tolerance violence policy. Meanwhile, at the exact same school, during the exact same week, a girl who physically bit another student's arm deep enough to leave marks was not suspended.
What happened to her?
She was merely sent to a wellness coach to process her complex emotions.
The contrast is unbelievable. But Riker insists it is entirely by design. One child engages in normal, imaginative, pretend play that boys have done for millennia and gets suspended. The other commits actual, undeniable physical violence and gets a taxpayer-funded therapy session.
Riker also points to a highly publicized case in New Zealand, where a primary school outright banned all rough-and-tumble play on the playground, officially labeling it in their newsletter as toxic masculinity in motion.
They banned playing tag and wrestling because it's toxic masculinity.
Yes. He says schools are actively trying to dismantle the biological foundations of masculinity, replacing math drills and competitive sports with feelings journals and collaborative circles, actively punishing stoicism and rewarding emotional breakdowns.
And this exact same ideological capture, Riker argues, has taken over the medical establishment.
This is where the book gets incredibly dark.
It does. He unpacks the profound disparities in healthcare funding and treatment, and the numbers he brings up are undeniable.
He points out that despite men dying earlier than women on average across almost every demographic, despite men suffering the vast majority of workplace fatalities and making up 80% of all suicides, institutional medical funding is wildly disproportionately allocated to women's health.
He cites data showing that breast cancer receives 6.5 times more funding from the National Institutes of Health than prostate cancer.
6.5 times.
This is despite the fact that prostate cancer is a massive, incredibly common killer of men. Riker argues that this funding disparity isn't an accidental oversight, it's a reflection of a system that inherently values female life, comfort, and longevity over male survival.
And it gets even more dystopian when Riker discusses the ideological denial of basic male biology by actual doctors.
Testosterone story.
He tells the story of a 58-year-old mechanical engineer in Houston. This man went to his doctor because he was experiencing profound fatigue, muscle loss, and depression. Blood tests confirmed he had clinically low testosterone.
A completely standard medical issue for a man that age.
He sought testosterone replacement therapy, which is a standard, heavily researched medical treatment. The doctor denied him the prescription, and the reasoning is the terrifying part.
What was the reason?
The doctor literally wrote in the patient's medical chart that the patient was exhibiting hormonal male entitlement.
Can you imagine? A man seeking medical care for a documented hormonal deficiency is told by a medical professional that his desire for baseline health is an expression of patriarchal privilege.
It's medical malpractice disguised as social justice.
Riker links this medical bias directly to his most philosophical and perhaps most alarming claim, that the fundamental pillars of Western civilization, the scientific method, objectivity, and empirical truth, are being deliberately and systematically deconstructed.
He argues that the feminist and Marxist frameworks view logic, data, and objectivity not as universal truths, but as white male constructs historically designed to oppress marginalized groups.
Therefore, these institutions believe they are morally obligated to replace empirical truth with lived experience and emotional resonance.
Wait, I want to make sure I'm reading this next part right. The examples he gives to prove this deconstruction of truth are absolutely absurd. Is he literally claiming that the NIH funded a researcher who says gravity is a myth? How does the book justify that leap?
He is literally claiming that, and he provides the grant number in the footnotes.
He has the grant number.
Yes. Riker highlights a grant awarded by the NIH to a sociological researcher who published a paper claiming that gravity is a patriarchal myth because it, quote, pulls things down, like oppression, and forces bodies into rigid, quantifiable states rather than fluid experiences.
That sounds like a parody. That sounds like something from an internet meme, but he says it's actual taxpayer-funded research.
It is. He writes about a medical student at Stanford who was expelled from his program, his crime. During a seminar on healthcare outcomes, he cited public CDC data on male mortality rates.
Just citing the CDC.
The university administration initiated a disciplinary hearing and labeled his use of statistical facts as biological determinism hate speech.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it demonstrates a complete institutional collapse. Riker even points to a university education course that teaches future teachers that mathematics itself is a form of emotional violence.
Math is emotional violence.
Because concepts like standard deviation force outliers into rigid boxes, and requiring a single correct answer to an equation is an assertion of authoritarian power.
When computer logic, statistics, and basic physics are attacked as tools of the patriarchy, Riker warns that we are entering a modern dark age, an age where feelings override physics and where capable men are purged from scientific, engineering, and medical fields simply because they refuse to validate anti-scientific dogma.
So, if the institutions of work, law, education, and science have all shifted so radically, how has this impacted the day-to-day cultural dynamic between men and women? What does this mean for dating, marriage, and attraction?
Riker argues that these institutional changes have drastically altered the cultural contract. He spends a significant amount of time breaking down the rise of female hypergamy.
Hypergamy is the evolutionary instinct for women to seek mates of higher socioeconomic status, physical protection, and resource provision.
While evolutionary biologists acknowledge this has always existed, Riker argues that the modern state has turbocharged it.
The state has removed any social stigma or legal penalty from women who abandon their marriages the moment a man's utility drops.
He outlines compelling data on marriage utility to back this up. Riker cites a 2023 Stanford study that found men who lose their jobs are 84% more likely to be divorced within 2 years of that job loss.
Let's pause on that number because it's staggering. An 84% increase in divorce risks simply for experiencing a career setback.
He uses this data to argue that the modern marriage contract, unlike traditional vows of for better or for worse, is now entirely hypergamous and transactional.
Loyalty, in his view, exists only as long as the man can continuously provide superior status, income, and lifestyle.
The moment he falters, whether due to a workplace injury, a macroeconomic downturn, or severe illness, the legal system, as we discussed earlier, is primed and ready to help the woman extract his remaining assets and exit the relationship seamlessly.
It's a bleak picture of modern relationships. You are only loved conditionally based on your output.
But Riker also explores how this ideology polices male desires, specifically through the lens of the body positivity movement.
Now, normally, body positivity is pitched in the media as a compassionate movement to help people feel good about themselves and combat eating disorders.
But Riker has a completely different take.
He views the movement as a sophisticated form of ideological control. He argues it is fundamentally not about health or self-acceptance, but about forcing biological reality to submit to feminist ideology.
Riker's argument is that the body positivity movement aggressively demands that men find obesity attractive. It actively works to reprogram innate evolutionary male sexual preferences for health and fertility markers.
He points to instances on social media and in HR sensitivity trainings where men who express a preference for fit or healthy women are publicly shamed, deplatformed, or even punished for committing what is essentially treated as a hate crime against women's self-esteem.
Yet, Riker points out a massive, glaring contradiction in this cultural mandate.
The plastic surgery aspect.
Exactly. While feminists and media figures demand that men alter their evolutionary preferences to accept all female body types regardless of health, women themselves overwhelmingly continue to seek plastic surgery, use digital filters, and chase highly traditional beauty standards to compete with one another for top-tier men.
He views this as the ultimate hypocrisy, punishing natural male desire while simultaneously exploiting it for social currency and attention.
It's a system that Riker says is designed to keep men constantly off balance, guilty, subservient, and questioning their own nature.
So after nearly 200 pages of laying out this incredibly dark, heavily cited map of institutional capture, from the HR struggle sessions to the family courts to the denial of physics and the policing of attraction, What is his solution?
Is it just doom and gloom?
That brings us to the final section of his book, The Path to Restoration.
Riker doesn't end the book in despair, which is vital for understanding his project. The final chapters operate as a survival manual.
They focus intensely on what he believes red-pilled men, or any man who values merit and logic, must do next. And his answer is incredibly direct. Opt out and build anew.
He argues that you cannot reform these institutions from within. You can't just vote in a new HR director and fix the company. The rot is too deep.
Exactly. Riker observes a rapidly growing trend of highly competent, high-achieving men simply walking away from corporate environments, legacy academia, and mainstream institutions.
He documents the rise of digital and physical sanctuaries where men are pooling resources, intellectual capital, and creating parallel structures.
He mentions some specific examples that sound like the beginnings of a completely alternate economy.
He talks about the Male Republic Discord server, which boasts over 50,000 members. These aren't just guys playing video games. They are sharing advanced legal strategies for surviving family court, exchanging HR survival tactics, and funding each other's startups.
He also highlights the Red Pill MBA. This is an underground, heavily vetted business network that entirely rejects ESG, environmental, social, and governance mandates.
For those unfamiliar, ESG is a corporate framework that often ties investment capital to meeting specific DEI quotas and social justice initiatives.
The Red Pill MBA network refuses ESG money, focusing purely on merit, unhindered financial growth, and logic. And perhaps most interestingly, he points to the No HR Club based out of Austin, Texas.
I love this part of the book. The No HR Club is a coalition of men who have built medium to large businesses that operate under private arbitration contracts.
They explicitly reject feminist legal norms and refuse to hire a single human resources staff member.
The story he tells about the Dallas construction firm is the perfect case study for this movement. According to Riker, this firm fired its entire HR staff in 2022. They completely dismantled the department.
They replaced it with a transparency board made up of actual productive employees from the engineering and construction teams.
The rules they instituted are fascinating. No more anonymous complaints. If you have an issue with someone, you face them. No more secret mediations that always default to siding with the accuser. Everything requires hard, objective evidence.
And the result. Riker says their employee turnover dropped by 68%, and overall productivity skyrocketed.
Men are flocking from across the state to work there because it's a true meritocracy based on fairness, output, and logic, not emotional blackmail.
This success story perfectly encapsulates Riker's ultimate message to his readers. He is telling men, do not apologize for your nature. Do not comply with systems that demand your humiliation as the price of admission.
He urges men to build independent institutions rooted in the classical foundations of Western thought, specifically the trivium.
Let's define the trivium for the listener because it's his philosophical anchor.
The trivium is the foundational educational method of classical antiquity, consisting of grammar, logic, and rhetoric.
Grammar is the mechanics of language and the definition of reality. Logic is the mechanics of thought and analysis. Rhetoric is the mechanics of communicating that truth persuasively.
Riker believes that by mastering reason through the trivium and refusing to participate in systems governed by emotional hysteria, men can literally starve the maternal state.
If the competent men leave, the system loses the competence and capital it requires to survive.
It is a profound, radical call to action for his target audience. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Conrad Riker's HR struggle sessions.
To synthesize what we've covered today, we have thoroughly mapped out Conrad Riker's polemical worldview.
We have detailed his extensive assertions, backed by the myriad of data points, leaked memos, and legal anecdotes he provides.
We've explored his claim that Western institutions, from the emotional coercion of corporate HR and the unilateral punitive power of family courts, to the estrogen-dominant schools and ideologically captured hospitals, have been systematically engineered to infantilize men and elevate maternal collectivism.
He paints a highly detailed picture of a society where objective merit is actively penalized, emotional volatility overrides empirical truth, and male identity is under constant systemic assault.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought, building directly on the source material we've just unpacked.
Yes, Riker shows a growing underground of men opting out, building their own businesses without HR departments, establishing private arbitration systems, and creating intentional, male-centric financial communities.
So, if the current system fundamentally relies on male labor, male innovation, male tax dollars, and male legal compliance to fund its massive bureaucratic and social initiatives,
What happens to the maternal state when the builders and the providers completely withdraw their participation from mainstream society? It's a question that could entirely define the next decade of cultural economics.
it really could.
If you found this deep dive valuable, if it helped you map out the arguments shaping our culture today and gave you the historical context you were looking for, please remember to like and subscribe to the show.
We highly encourage everyone in our target audience to buy Conrad Reicher's book on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
Do not just take our word for it. Go read the full data, the internal memos, and the complete arguments for yourselves to fully understand the scope of his thesis.
Absolutely. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books, get the ebook, and make sure to follow the author at Conrad and Reicher on Substack for his ongoing updates and to join the community discussion.
Thank you for joining us on this massive journey today. Stay sharp, keep questioning the narratives, and we will see you on the next deep dive.